Hello everyone. Today I will tell you a true horror story from a Japanese netizen's experience. It is a contribution from a netizen. I hope you like it. This happened about 10 years ago, but it's something that regularly plays on my mind. I think this happened just past 1 a.m. I was fast asleep, but then I was awoken by the sound of something heavy and metallic against something. It was stressful to be woken up like that, and I was lying in bed wondering what had happened. About 30 seconds had passed when I heard the same sound again. Since I had another chance to hear the sound again, I now thought that it sounded like a metal pole or rod smashing against something heavy and dense. It continued. It seemed like it was occurring every 30 seconds or so. I had to take a look outside. It was so weird, and I was very curious. My bedroom was on the second floor and it faced the street. I lived in a residential area. Back then it was usually very quiet, especially this late at night. We didn't get much noise from traffic passing either, so this was really odd. I was looking out of the window, and for a while I couldn't even figure out where the noise was coming from. It looked like there was no one on the streets. Well, that's what I thought until I spotted a figure standing in the middle of the road, about 3 houses away. It was a man. He was slightly illuminated beneath the yellow street alt wide. I wondered if he lived in one of the houses he was stood in front of. I hadn't seen him before, and, based on the way he was, stood like a statue in the street, I wouldn't mind not seeing him again either. He was creeping me out, and the man's feet was about 5 black garbage bags. They seemed to surround him. It was strange because in our area we were told by the council to use a kind of yellowish garbage bag. The trash collection workers said if it's not in a yellow bag, then they don't pick it up. To me this was a red flag. This is where things get really weird. I thought at one point the garbage bags he was stood over looked like a body. I must have stared at the man for about 10 to 15 minutes and he didn't move a muscle. The metal sound stopped after a while, and I was too tired to figure out what was happening out there. So I went to bed. I woke up the next morning late for work and headed out. It wasn't until it was dark that I returned. Just as I was turning my key in the lock, I remembered the events of the night before. My brain literally said what was going on with the guy last night. Under the street light, I looked across at the home that the man was seemingly stood in front of. The strange thing was it was pitch black out. I couldn't see the house I had seen the night before. I was freaked out by this because I knew that I saw that man last night stood in front of a house on my street, and now I couldn't even make out where he once was stood. I then figured out why I couldn't see him. There was no street alt wide anywhere near that house. I ran upstairs and looked out of the window thinking that my eyes had deceived me. But when I pulled back the curtain, my spine went cold. There was no street light opposite that house. I don't care what anyone says. I saw that man on that yellow street light in front of that house. I know it wasn't a dream either. I have still no idea how this happened. All I know is that my life went downhill fast after I laid eyes on that man. If anyone has any theories, I'm all ears. I can't get that night out of my head. This happened a long time ago when I went with some friends to a famous haunted location in my hometown. It was an abandoned hospital. We went in a group for guys. For girls, it was a long time ago now. I was much younger. Back then I was in my early 20s. We went there as a dare, a test of our collective courage, kind of like a ghost hunt. It was there where I experienced true horror for the first time in my life. Even now, when I think back on it, my spine goes ice-cold. Whenever I see any of the old gang who went with me to the abandoned hospital, we all recount what happened. I'm not the type to go in supposedly haunted places. I jump at my own shadow and I get so freaked whenever I watch a horror film. But being in a big group put my mind at ease. I wasn't too worried. On the drive to the abandoned hospital, everyone was so loud and excited. In the car there were 2 guys in the group A and B who said that they had the ability to sense spirits. They seemed to be the driving force in organizing this trip, and they seemed very interested in getting there and looking around. The upbeat energy and conversation soon died off when we arrived and we were all stood in front of the twisted gates. We all seemed cowardly, especially the boys who were spearheading this trip. The two guys were muttering about how it was weird that the vibes had been sapped. I agreed. I felt that there was a bit of a strange atmosphere around the hospital. Out here in the tranquility of the mountains. There was something so off-putting about it, as if it was trying to keep you away, like a warning to a potential trespass. Something told me this wasn't a good idea. Having said that, we all had went to such a big effort to come here and gear ourselves up for a paranormal adventure. It would be a shame if we went home without setting foot in there. So there we all stood. Not one of us wanting to go in and every one of us wanting to go home, with none of us willing to say anything. We slowly approached the gates. We entered the hospital grounds through the gate and we slowly tried to build up the conversation again. The more we talked, the less we were focused on being scared. It was at this point, someone in the group said, "Hey, where's NB?" I scanned the area and noticed that they were both still back at the gate. The rest of us were slightly concerned that the two who had instigated the whole trip and stated that they had the sixth sense were not coming with us. We had walked back and someone had called out, "What's the matter? What are you two scared of?" I imagined them to be cowering, huddled together. I was losing my faith in these guys. When I approached, I found that they were just stood side by side, one muttering to the other quietly, to the best of my recollection. "This is what I heard. Did you see that?" "Hey, you saw it too." I saw everything as I got closer. I saw that they had serious looks on their faces. Their friends had said that they had this kind of ability to sense the presence of ghosts and the paranormal. From a young age, they said that they were used to experiences like this and that they don't get scared anymore. I felt that a conversation like that was only intended to fuel our fears. And I thought that these two and their friends were just trying to scare me. I could smell a prank coming, so I just went up and asked them outright, "What did you guys see?" Then, to my surprise, I answered just a second ago. There was someone on the roof of the hospital. Then more people. They were all there. They were there. Then they were jumping one after another from the roof. There's so many of them. This made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The roof was behind me, over my right shoulder, and I felt this insect-palpable sense of being watched, like some force was pulling me, urging me to look over my shoulder. I gave into that force and I looked. I turned and faced the hospital and I saw a black shadowy figure on the edge of the roof peering at me. I couldn't make out its eyes or any facial features. It was just a dreadful black shadow. I knew it was looking at me. I knew it sensed me. I was trapped. I couldn't do anything but watch it. Then silently jumped from the edge of the roof into the shadows below. Without thought or intention, I let out a scream. I think I wasn't the only one who saw it, but I was the only one who screamed. My legs were trembling with fear. I could barely keep myself upright. They then said, "This is as far as we should go. Let's leave now." Those of us who saw that figure or figures on the roof and those who didn't see anything at all were in unanimous agreement with her. We rushed back to the car and sped out of the mountainous woods. It took weeks for me to be able to sleep with the light off after that incident. I have never known a sense of horror like that. Since this story takes place when I was with my ex, we will call her for the sake of anonymity. After we split up, we still keep in touch. Sometimes we would call one another to check in and just have a laugh. Usually it was for no particular reason. But that night I sensed something different in her tone of voice. I seemed stressed out and she asked if I could come over. She had moved in with a friend recently and it seemed as if her friend was out. I was home alone and wanted me to come over. She hadn't invited me over since we split up. I thought I'd go for it. Since it sounded like a nice opportunity to see her again, I stopped at a convenience store to pick up her favorite sweets before heading over. On the drive over, I was wondering why she had called me and what the problem was. She didn't say anything except come over, as soon as you can, thinking about it. Her voice sounded more frightened than stressed out. I wondered for a moment if it was a trick or some kind of trap. But when I saw her waiting for me outside, I knew she wasn't faking anything. She looked terrified. I asked her what was wrong and she said that someone had been trying to kick a door in her apartment in. Let me just briefly describe the apartment's floor plan. When you go through the front door, you have to open another door to go through to the main rooms of the house, kind of like a tiny lobby. In a way, this was the door in question. I said it was being kicked or pummeled. I found this very hard to believe because in order to get to this door, an intruder would have to get through the front door and that could obviously be locked. Plus you would hear someone coming right. But she said she had heard these kicking sounds moments after the house had been silent. There seemed to be no reason or pattern to this either. Let's just be clear for a second. I don't have any kind of ability to sense ghosts and I'm not a medium. I've never seen a ghost and I've never had any kind of experience which I could remotely relate to the paranormal I could see. She was really freaked out, so I stayed as calm as possible. It wasn't hard, as I was a bit of a skeptic. It's probably just an airflow thing with that room. I'm sure the air pressure in the room is making it seem as if the door is being kicked, when really the air is just being blown in it. Somehow I said, like the smart ass I am, I remembered that I was picking at the sweets I had brought over at the time. I said that the look on her face told me that she didn't believe my theory. Then, as if to confirm that I was wrong, I heard one loud dull thud against the door. There wasn't a TV or a radio on at the time. It was just me, and that visibly worried. Oh, as soon as I heard that thud, I jumped. I nearly hit the ceiling. It really startled me. Pa glared at me. I could tell this was disturbing for her. She began to tremble again. I went to check. I had to. I opened the door which leads to the front door. No one was there. The front door was shut, so there was no reason for this sudden bang. I started to get a little freaked out at this point. The first thing I did, which felt like the most logical thing I could in that moment, was go and check the front door was locked. I went back into the room with her to convince her that we were safe. Shortly after I returned to her, I heard an even bigger thud come from the same place. I remember I just stood there staring at it for a while. I swear I saw it vibrate with impact when I looked at it, as if it had just been kicked. Who's that? I called out as I threw open the door. No one there. The front door was still locked. No one could have gotten it. I heard her sobbing in the other room. At this point I had to reluctantly deny that what was going on was caused by a human. When my thoughts turned towards the paranormal, I started trembling too. Then the intercom doorbell rang. I was pretty surprised to open the door to see our friend standing there. It seems as if she called her roommate. At the same time she called me. She said she had to explain something to us. We left the apartment together and after a very short walk, we arrived at a large national highway. She said that she heard from the neighbors that an incident had happened before she and I moved in. It was an incident involving a car crashing into a motorbike a while back. It was a hit and run in the dead of the night, with no other cars on the street and the motorcyclist being extremely banged up and unable to walk. He made his way off the highway by crawling. Who knows how long it took him to reach the first house he could find our new place. What was a short walk for us might have taken hours for the motorcyclist, who had been half crushed to death. When he finally reached the front door of the first house, he found he hammered on it with his remaining strength. No one must have been home, as his body was found the next morning. With a clenched fist resting against the glass, I turned a frightening shade of pale white. I kept silent. We then understood that was the source of the banging. I went home that night. Our roommate kept her company. Shortly after this, I moved out and into another apartment. We still keep in touch, but we never talk about that night. I think about that night all the time. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. What was the spirit of the motorcyclist trying to tell us that night? Or did he just not want to be forgotten? How long was I listening to that awful beat? I'm not sure I even understand it completely. Maybe it's not for me to understand. One thing for certain is, I try not to go anywhere near that house. And if it cannot be avoided, then I can't even bring myself to look at it. This happened when I was in the 5th grade. I was 10 or 11 years old. My classmates and I went on a field trip to an amusement park called Space World for about a week. I think it was for about a week. 2 of my cousins were on the trip. We had a great time. On our first day there, I was sharing a room with my 2 cousins, and I remember we were excitingly chatting about what we were going to do the next day. Then later we were all exhausted and the vibe had died down a little. I guess this was about 8 p.m. I heard a voice, not one of my cousins' voices. A girl's voice. "Hey," her voice called out. I replied I was a little surprised that she wanted to chat. But since we were on a school trip and the hotel was a budget one, I guess that everyone in her room was too tired to chat to her. She seemed nice and we chatted through the wall for about an hour. It must have been a very thin wall. I must have fallen asleep too. We had a long day of riding the rides. So anyway, the next day I woke up early, eager to explore Space World theme park once again, and also eager to meet the girl who I had been chatting with the night before. So naturally I was the first one out of our room. I heard her voice coming from the left-hand side last night, but when I left our hotel I realized that we were the last hotel room on the left. There wasn't a hotel room there. Next to our room was nothing but a staircase. Judging on the position of my room in relation to the height of the stairs, I can safely say that there was no way someone could be tall enough to press their mouth to the wall and chat with me like I heard that girl did last night. They have to be over 8 foot tall. So I just stood there at 8'10", staring at the descending staircase on our floor, wondering or maybe praying for a logical answer, or at least an answer which wouldn't keep me up at night. What made matters worse was when I recounted what she had said to me last night. "Hey, why don't you come next door?" I said at the time that I was too tired and I just wanted to go to bed. I figured we would have time to hang out in the morning. What would have happened if I left my room that night? I heard later from some older school friends that the last room on the left in that hotel was known to be haunted. Legend has it, a girl was jumping around on the beds with her friends and misjudged her final jump, resulting in her landing awkwardly on her neck. And well, I guess you can figure out the rest. When I pressed my friends for more information, they said she had passed away when she was in the same year as us at school. It seems that, regardless of the rumors, something tragic happened in that room. The weird thing about all of this wasn't the rumors or the fact that I had spoken with some phantom girl that nobody else had. It was one of the photos my friend took on the trip. I am standing at the end of a line of kids in my class and there appears to be a pale hand left shoulder. I need to see it again, but I haven't heard from that kid in years. If that's the case and it is something otherworldly, then I don't mind. I like to think that she followed me out of the hotel because she was lonely. I spoke with her and I don't think that she's a bad spirit. Since that day, nothing weird has happened. I'm sure that she's not a bad spirit. I just want to pray for her soul. I don't know how to set her free. This summer I bought an apartment I had been dying to buy for so long. It wasn't new, but it was just what I wanted to own. Something for myself was very moving. I felt so proud. It was amazing because it heralded the end of long train rides every day to work. It was relieving to know that I wouldn't be governed by the last train home. I could now commute to work, which was just 1,000 times more convenient. I don't have any plans on getting married. I don't have a special someone in my life, but getting something absolute like a place to call my own until I sold it is something really great. I had been living in my new place for a couple of weeks when something had begun to annoy me. It's so hot during summer I have to leave the window open to get the ventilation. My only issue with that is I keep smelling cigarette smoke. My apartment is a corner room on the east side of the building, so my guess is that other residents are stepping out on the balcony to smoke on the left-hand side. A year before I moved here I was a smoker, so back then I wouldn't have minded, but I quit. It wasn't good for me. It made me want to light up. I couldn't have that. Plus, I was certain that smoking was prohibited on the balconies in this apartment block. I felt like I should complain, but I was the new person in the block. I didn't know what kind of trouble might come my way if I put in a complaint this early with my neighbors. I thought I would just shut the window and crank the AC. Just let it go and stop finding fault. I thought after a couple of days I got a call from the building management. I honestly thought that they were just checking in to see how I was doing, but they called to report a complaint. The person who lives next door complained I had been smoking on the balcony. I remember the person who called me said, it's just that there are families here with babies and smoke isn't good for kids. Right? I'm sure you understand. So no more smoking. Okay. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't smoking. So I was naturally annoyed at being accused of this. I just said I don't smoke and hung up. It was annoying, but I figured out that the person next door wasn't the smoker, so the smoke had to be coming from someplace else. Maybe above or below. The issue was unresolved, but the days crept by. I kept my window shut, but it got to the point where it was too hot to have it open, and as soon as I opened it there it was the smell of tobacco. It drifted into my room almost instantly. It was obvious that someone was smoking nearby, but rather than start a witch hunt, I thought I would leave it to the building management to figure out. I mean, how could I complain? They thought I was the guy who was smoking. I didn't want the hassle. Time went by and later I discovered something strange. The order I hung the laundry up in had changed. I set out my jacket and trousers side by side. I know I did, and when I went to retrieve them they were the opposite ends of the clothesline. I looked at it and thought, can I honestly say this is a prank or something that a gust of wind did? Why would someone move? It was around this point that I figured out that something creepy was going on. I could let someone off if they smoked on the balcony. I honestly didn't care. But if someone was messing with my clothes then we had a problem. But the question lingered, why would someone climb over my balcony just to mess with me? Were they doing this when I was at work? What was the deal here and what was the point? My apartment is on the 8th floor. Was it Spider-Man? Did he have a problem with me? Moreover, nothing was ever stolen. I've heard of underwear thieves in Japan, but my thumbs and breasts were always left untouched. Just my day laundry was being moved. What annoyed more than the smell of tobacco and my clothes being moved around was the fact that this had no logical answer. No matter how many times I thought about it, the further from the conclusion I became. I decided to seek the advice of a friend who is into the paranormal and the occult. He said that I should leave out some salt on addition, some sake wine in a glass. I'm not a believer in the paranormal, but I would take any suggestion I could get. At this point, the whole thing was really stressing me out. The next morning I went out on the balcony and checked my salt, and the second I couldn't believe my eyes. The salt looked hard and dirty and the sake had turned a murky blackish color. What the hell is going on with my balcony? I thought. I called my friend. I needed some advice. I told him what happened with the salt and sake. He told me that I have a very bad spirit on my hands and it seems to like the balcony. I hadn't ever experienced anything paranormal before. I was completely taken aback. Do you know who lived here before you? He asked. I didn't know. I just bought the place from the realtor. Since the realtor didn't mention anything suspicious about the place, I just assumed it was a great deal and a great apartment. I thought for sure that the former resident must know something about these strange goings-on. I contacted the realtor and said I had a question for the former resident. They said that if I had something to ask, I could ask them and then they would ask him and then I would get my answer. That sounded super long-winded, and I didn't really want to tell them about my paranormal experiences. So I told them not to worry about bothering the former resident. Then the realtor said this. Oh, by the way, the former resident said something interesting before he moved out. He asked me to tell the next person who moves here to leave an offering near the window on a plate. I did just that. I bought some sweets and something called a kamidama to help keep the spirit happy. The smell of tobacco went away and the laundry stopped being messed with. After that, it's really hard to tell what has been going on in this apartment. But one thing is now a constant: I leave an offering daily, without exception. The Shokin Name Park is one of Japan's national parks. It's in Tokyo, between Toshigawa and Ekeizumi. Before there was a park, there was the Tachikawa Airfield, famous, of course, during World War II. The park is 40 times the size of the Tokyo Dome Arena and is considered a green oasis in the metropolitan city. Way back when I was a student at university, I landed a part-time job in the Shokin Park, surveying the number of visitors. The job couldn't be easier. All I had to do was sit in a chair and click a counter every time a visitor walked past and entered the park. It was mind-numbingly simple. Little did I know that one of the strangest experiences which has ever happened to me would take place while I worked there. It happened during the early onset of winter. It was pretty cold. I think it was around 4 p.m. at a guest. The sky was a shade of dark crimson red. I was in a pretty decent mood as my shift was about to end. A gentle wind was blowing at the time. It had been really busy that morning. Well, right up until that point, actually. Then a welcome lull in the influx of visitors came with all the commotion of the day. It was hard to believe that there was a hiatus. But there was one. It felt odd. Something didn't seem quite right. I felt a bit uncomfortable. A football came scuffing along the ground towards my feet. I stopped it with the inside of my foot and looked around. I couldn't see anyone playing football in the park nearby. I don't know how else to explain it, but I felt like I was the last person on earth, like for a moment. It was just me, completely alone in a world devoid of humans. What the hell was this? I wondered. An indescribable fear gripped me and it wouldn't let go. It was quickly joined by a buzzing sense of anxiety. While I was studying the football before me, I saw a shadow grow behind. The owner of that shadow seemed to be a little boy. Perhaps he was the owner of the football too. I wondered for a moment. I instinctively went to turn and face him, but something inside told me not to. Something told me to look away. I just stared at the grass and watched his shadow. The shadow didn't move an inch. A second or so passed. Then that gust of wind blew once again, and then a family passed in front of me. I clicked my counter in my hand 3 times without realizing I was really freaked out by this, and only realized it later when the number had gone up. I still remember the number it was on. After this experience, 8, 4, 5, 9, I checked over my shoulder and the boy's shadow had disappeared. There was no one there. No owner of the football in sight. I think in that moment I was somewhere else. Be it somewhere in history or on another plane of consciousness. I simply was not there.